Yeah, and on his throttle foot, he had 6 toes. So as it is, when you find yourself making new car friends that maybe have different backgrounds and experiences, they tend to influence you to possible new decisions or new adventures in the future. Some really new friends that I've come to know and just think so well of them, almost like family, is Mike Meyer and his dad Butch Meyer. They have Legacy Autosport. We're doing a little pro Indy 2000 driving on the road to Indy. But you may recognize their last name Meyer because Mike, who's my age, his great grandfather had actually won the Indy 500 in 1928. And he became the first 3-time winner of the Indy 500. And he's also the same person that started the milk tradition. So we're focusing on the road to Indy and some aspirations of driving modern cars in the future. But as it is with any racers, any true guard guys, we always think about what we want to build and things you find and do. And Mike's dad, Butch, engine builder his whole life. You know, when he was a little kid, he was helping build 4-cam IndyCar engines in the 60s. You know, his dad, Sonny Meyer, was an engine builder. And the last name Meyer, you'll recognize from Meyer Drake and Offenhauser. So this is right deep in the heart of Indianapolis racing. As it goes on a little further. And of course, you all know with regard to Genius Garage, the things that we've had, like the old IndyCar project, the one that blew up with the V8 in it. We're doing the K-swap, and recently got the Lotus Exosphere donated, and the Daytona prototype with the BMW V10s in it, which need a little help. And actually, it's really nice because Butch, the engine builder, he's helping out Genius Garage get the BMW engine back up. So we got this big V8 sitting around at Genius Garage that came out of our IndyCar. And it's a 410. And some of the fans out there may recognize 410 is very common in sprint car racing, which is cool and crazy, but I've never really been exposed to it. And this engine's been sitting around because it lost oil pressure, had some issues. It didn't get blown to smithereens, so there's a lot of good stuff there, but it's been sitting around. And one day, Mike told me that his dad, Butch, was thinking, it's like, what's going on with the engine? You know, Butch is like, we ought to rebuild that. And I'm like, okay, well, that'd be awesome. You know, we weren't getting around in it. And I'm like, what do we do with it? And Mike's like, well, that's what they put in sprint cars. I'm like, okay, well, what's the sprint car cost? He's like, this is a really good one for $4,000. I'm like, $40,000? He's like, $4,000. I'm like, what? Yeah, and Dad's running the Midwest Throwback Series, which is like pre-down tube cars, you know, kind of like 80s, early 90s, running on dirt. I'm like, that sounds fun. And I'm like, hold up. You're telling me we can get a nice sprint car roller for $4,000 and your dad's going to help Genius Garage and rebuild the motor and we can pay for parts. Like, your dad's cool with that, right? Yeah, and the sprint car's good. Yeah. I'm like, I think that's a good idea for Genius Garage. Get the sprint car. The engine that came out of the Indy car before it got blown up, and it didn't really get blown up, it just got kind of hurt. So we'll fix it up. It was making 840 horsepower at the wheels on gasoline. When you run things on methanol, they tend to make more power. So I don't know what kind of power this is going to make, but it's going to be more than 900. And sprint cars weigh like 1,300 pounds. It's funny because the sprint car on dirt, which has the driving position of like a bar stool and a school bus steering wheel, and the equivalent of driving a sand rail, obliterates our Lotus Formula One car in terms of power to weight, and it's on the dirt. You know, IndyCar racing way back when, like Indy Roadsters in the 50s and 60s, they weren't that much different than a sprint car. Sprint cars were more upright. So those things evolved from largely the same area. It's just that Indy cars were faster, the Roadsters, you know, you laid down more. And then they started to branch away when the rear engine revolution, everything came around. But Indy Roadsters back when, that's the heart and that's the soul of IndyCar racing in Indianapolis. And I think anybody who looks at history or older people that maybe remember that from when they were a kid, that was really it. So Mike had mentioned the sprint car we bought. There was a gentleman, a little bit of a health concern, and he wanted his car to go to a good home. And loved the Myers and Mike, obviously, and Genius Garage is a really amazing thing. So it got to find a good home with that. And Mike had mentioned to me, he goes, you know, in his barn, he's got a Watson Indy Roadster chassis sitting there and like a nose and tail for it, and the parts are scattered about. I'm like, do you think he might sell it? And he's like, he might. Let me ask him nicely at the right time. So a little time goes by and whatnot, and it came to be where, you know, he agreed to do it. And I'm like, and now this one, so the sprint car, that's Genius Garage's. That's gonna be for the program of the students and doing it with it. But I'm like, Mike, you and me, we gotta do this road. So this has gotta be like our project. I'm in. If we can do it, I'm in. Let's do it. And we had talked about it. It was kind of just creating the relationship with the gentleman, you know. Didn't think he was going to get to the project, but it was there and buried. Something really special. More time went by, and Butch and Mike came by the Genius Garage shop to visit, and we went out to lunch. And we were just brainstorming and talking about neat things we want to do in the future, or build, or business kind of ideas and racing and what things, and kind of just our own hopes and dreams together and how we can make it work. We decided with the Roadster, if we can get it, that's something that we want to do. It's something that I'm romantic about, loving IndyCar racing and history, and I think a lot of people know I kind of have that sort of cavalier attitude about, back in the days when it took balls and brawn and intelligence, and that sort of thing. So I obviously like that. But, for Mike and Butch, that's their family. So it means a lot. But of course, they don't have a Roadster. They just see him in the museum, or when they go to the museum and see like the great granddad's car and stuff. And Butch was working on that stuff when he was a kid. The gentleman says that he'd sell it to us. And I was going to buy it, and Mike and I are doing it together. So I sent Mike money so he can go buy it. And I kept bugging the poor guy. Every day we'd be talking or about what's going on, or working on things for Indy Pro, or trying to get the new monococks in from Europe with the Halo for this coming year, and all the difficulties with that. And every day I'm like, did you get the Roadster? And he's like, I couldn't get the truck ready. I'm like, did you get the Roadster? It's snowing. I'm like, did you get the Roadster? My brother said he was coming, but he wouldn't come because it was snowing in his truck. I'm like, he's got a truck. And I was like feeling bad because I kept asking every day. So it just wasn't, lots going on for him at the race shop and everything. And then, so actually this past weekend, I was really excited. I have a buddy of mine who's a doctor, and he's worked really hard his whole life. And he just has one cool Mustang back from when he was high school. And I've been trying to get him to race forever. And I could never get him to I'm like, come on, dude, let's go racing. And I finally got him to buy a used LO206 Sprint race car to go racing. And I'm like, this is monumental for the buddy. And it was in Indianapolis, and I'm like, just see if you can have the guy drop it off at the shop. Like, get the deal done. It's a really good deal. And so I called Mike, and Mike was really nice and helped out and let the go-kart drop off at his race shop. So my buddy Scott, that bought the cart, and I, Friday, we're going to go to Indianapolis. So he can get the cart, pick it up, have a little fun. I told Scott, I'm like, Scott, you really ought to take Mike out. Like, take him out to dinner, because, it takes effort for him to deal with the go-kart and stuff. And so we're going to go out, and we have a really nice dinner, have a lot of fun together. And so Saturday is the day, finally, we're going to go get the Roadster. I've got the truck. We're going to go there. I don't care if I have to drag it back to the shop. We're getting this thing. It was a fun journey because, it starts off there, and we got the sprint cars, and Butch's got his, and working on the Road to Indy US F2000s, and my poor Pro 2000 is sitting there still waiting on the new monocoque. And we finally go, and it's a little, neighborhood, classic American neighborhood with a barn out back, and close to the speedway. And we go back, and there's all this amazing Americana, signs from the early 70s like Danger and Eagle, Parnelli Jones from Gasoline Alley, and all this amazing memorabilia and sprint cars of this gentleman through all the years. And buried on the jig is the Watson Indy Roadster chassis. There's the old blueprints, there's a nose, there's a tail, there's a steering box, there's axles, there's all the basic stuff we need to be able to build a Roadster. It was really exciting. So here we are, we're like trying to get through the snow, and it's really hard to get there. And I got my big dually diesel pickup truck, but it's only 2-wheel drive. And we're trying to jockey it around, and of course I try to pull off in the snow, but there's a ditch, so I get it stuck in high side in the ditch. And it's kind of a comedy of errors. And Mike forgot to change his shoes. He's still wearing Crocs from the shop, fording through the snow. So here we are, we get the Roadster. Trying to move things out, we get the chassis, put it in the truck, move it to the other truck and strap it down. We get the nose and the tail, and it was just kind of special. It's kind of like if anybody's seen the documentary, I think it was back in the 90s, called Super Speedways, that IMAX film. It was Mario and Michael Andretti, and also paralleled a story of finding an Indy Roadster in a barn and restoring it. So it's a lot like that. But it was special to me to be able to do it with good friends. My buddy that's just getting into kart racing finally, Dr. Buddy, and Mike, a new friend. We really get on well. And then obviously his family relates to IndyCar racing, and now he's trying to make his way in IndyCar racing. And I too share that same dream, but we love building cars. And when we're in the barn pulling out this old Watson Roadster to build together, we realized that in 4 years, I think, will be 100 years since his great-grandfather first made it to Indianapolis as a mechanic. And I looked at Mike and I said, we got 4 years. We got to get a car in the field, the Indy 500, in those 4 years together. We've got to do it before the 100th anniversary. So that's kind of our little moment to each other, like, we got to do this. So we get the Indy Roadster, and like let's take the back way to the shop, you know, because his shop's over by Lucas Oil or Old Indy Raceway Park. Because I didn't want like old Watson Indy Roadster parts like flying out the back of the truck on the highway. So we're driving along and we're talking about his great granddad Louis Meyer, and I'm like, guy won 3 times back in the 20s and 30s. I mean, you got to be a serious guy. And I sat in his 28 Indy winner, and I said, so Mike, was your great granddad just like a total badass, or like, what do you attribute that to? He's like, I think he actually had a lot of driving talent, because one time when he was like 80 some years old, a college had him drive this electric car in a race, and he lapped the field twice when he was like 85 years old. I'm like, damn. And then a minute goes by and Mike kind of pauses and he goes, yeah, and on his throttle foot, he had 6 toes. I'm like, what? Hold on. I just broke into laughing. I'm like, you're BSing me, right? Your great granddad that won the Indy 500 3 times, like decades before anybody had ever heard of Andretti or Unser, did not have 6 toes on his throttle foot. And he's like, I swear to God. So Mike goes in this story. He's like, one time when I was 12, he was sleeping in his recliner with his feet up. I'd heard the stories, so I kind of quietly looked over. I didn't want to be weird though. And I'm just losing it because this is just, I mean, it just feels good. Like that the things you hear about, the things you dream about, it's just real. You know, they're tangible adventures from real people that had a dream that weren't afraid to go for it. It's just great fun with friends, but I'm just so glad to be connected with Mike and his dad Butch. They're just awesome guys. And regardless of how far our journey goes, at the very least, I'm very excited to be part of building the Roadster with them.
5 years ago, the first sponsor we ever had here on the VINwiki channel was Caffeine and Octane. Now, they're our local Atlanta Cars and Coffee meetup that I've been going to for 15 or so years now, but it is now the largest monthly recurring automotive gathering on Earth. Now, you'll also recognize Caffeine and Octane from their television show, and the next season of that airs very soon on Motor Trend. In their quest for further automotive world domination, they just bought the legendary Lanier Motor Speedway, which is across the street from Road Atlanta. So throughout the next year, we're going to have a lot of amazing events there that you'll be invited to join. But the coolest project they've deployed lately is called HighOctane.tv, and it's a free streaming network that you can access from any smart TV, Roku, Fire Stick, smartphone, or a computer, and it'll give you access to a ton of programming, including all 5 seasons of their show, some content from creators we love like David Patterson, That Dude in Blue, and a ton more. Soon there will be some content from VINwiki on there as well. So visit the link in the description below to learn more about the amazing world of Caffeine and Octane.